Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and we are now approaching our fourth week. This is the last week we'll talk about Shelley's Frankenstein, and I hope you have begun to kind of see the value, excuse me, of pursuing these master works and the windows that they open to us and allow us to look into not only that century or what the period of time in which they were written, but they also give us some insights that we can probably claim for our own time period that we live in. So we have written on this will be the third take of different aspects of the story. And one of the things that it teaches you is that there's not just one story, there's not just one narrative. History is much like that as well. We think there's one history when in reality there are many. And the same thing's true in the lessons that we can learn and draw from these great writers as Shakespeare and Chaucer and now Shelley. There's some great things that we could look at. The question comes back again. We need to repeat this as we go through the class just to kind of understand why we read masterpieces. When we see classic literature like Frankenstein, it offers us a lot of plot and character. It provides a window as we sit into the period of time, mainly to the anxieties and the values and the social dynamics of the time. Shelley's going to explore gender and look at science and morality and how that changed and how far, we think about how far we've come from that. And then as we face our own day, we seem to be going backwards in many of those areas. The late 1800s was a time of great turmoil between the age of enlightenment and reason and the age of faith. And of course, there was a lot of discussion with Darwin's theory coming out in 1859 of the origin of species, and then his Descent of Man in 1870. George Lyell comes out with the idea in the late 1800s that the Earth was much older than 10,000 years, which Bishop Ussher had instilled in most Bibles. Most people in the 1800s thought the Earth was 10,000 years old. So there's a great turmoil. There's great uncertainty. The idea of faith maybe not being exactly accurate when it comes to science and things of that nature. These areas were all raised in Shelley's writing when it came to morals, morality, and science. There was what was called a war between science and religion from that point on. And it still goes on today as we see it in the current anti-vaccination and seemingly the war on science against that the present administration is waging in stopping experimentations and things of that nature is very, very relevant to the day that we live in and the concepts that we're dealing with. The other big issue that she talks about is gender, of course, and a woman in her day would not have been allowed, would have been very unusual for her to be writing and discussing and thinking about these things of great substance that she writes and thinks about. So it's really a good thing for us to kind of think about that. We talked before about the language of Frankenstein as a demon or daemon and the psychological meaning of that and the fears of science and his own creation, own world, that there were demons out there, that they were, contrary to humans and those kind of things. And then, of course, nature and nurture is a big deal. This is the beginning of, Freudian psychology, if you will, and the question of whether, people are the way they are because of nature and how it forms them, or whether they could be nurtured into a better being. Everybody's a demon. That's almost the old biblical view of every man's a sinner, and he has to be nurtured into being better than that. And so that's the picture we see here with Frankenstein. Is if Frankenstein had taken his monster, for lack of a better term, and nurtured him and been kind to him and taught him, would he have had the same desires and the same hungers that he ended up having? And it really, there's a very, very deep imagery here of a biblical view of human beings, being fallen, being ostracized, being demonic, and if we can actually nurture them into being better human beings. And of course, in 1800s, that was when, among other things, prison mentalities changed, the idea toward incarceration, and of course, in what causes a person to be criminal. Is it a disease, or is it just the wickedness of the heart, whatever it was? And if they could be reformed or not. Prison reform actually begins to come into vogue in the late 1800s. So there's a lot of things that are going on in this discussion that kind of reflect upon Shelley's book. And so let me ask you, as you do this final final essay, to reflect on those questions, consider how Shelley's work helps us to understand past generations, how it helps us to interrogate our own, ask questions about what we're living in, and in your final discussion, you'll choose one of these things and you'll share your perspective. Thank you for your perspective. I hope you're gaining something in the critique as far as improving your writing, improving your understanding of reading and thinking about these different things. But I do appreciate your efforts. And if you ever need to ask a question or need to talk to me about something, please don't fail to do that. And we'll look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you.